Now, right? So welcome to another edition of TPT. I'm afraid all the grown-ups are away, so I'm almost in charge until I hand over to our guest. Of course, we've got a really good one. We've all been hearing about growth. There's a smirk going on in the background. So one of the key government policies is, as always, is to grow or build our way into growth. I don't know what the hell they're going to build this time, right? But I know someone who does. So welcome to our special guest, Linda Wright, aka the headmistress. Linda, over to you. And I'm going to try and stop talking.
Oh, right. Share screen. Marvelous. Thank you. Hello, everybody. How are we? Move that. God's sake.
No swearing, Linda, remember?
Right. Okay. Yes, boss. Okay. Good evening, everybody. Or whenever you watch this, as it's number one being live streamed, but it's also being recorded as well. And I'm just going to move that down out of my way. Good evening, everybody. I've done this presentation to this group before. There's a few tweaks. Now, to be perfectly honest, there might be a few more tweaks next week because we're being threatened with more planning reforms next week. So maybe I might have to come back and do this again next week. I've called it, oh my God, more planning reforms. These are the ones that have happened over the last 2 years. This is for England only. It's not for Wales, Scotland, Ireland. It's for England only. Wales has a very similar but slightly different system. So this is England only. My name is Linda Wright. The company is A Planet Wright. I'm a planning strategist, independent consultant. I help people to get planning permission. So what have we had for the last 2 years? Well, we've had these two people now, Bojo and Rob the Builder generic. He's gone. We've had the pandemic over the last 2 years. It's still not gone away. People are still getting COVID and going into hospital and or more or less surviving with it now, and not getting quite as desperately ill, sadly. We've all been working from home in our pajamas or pants or whatever item of clothing you chose to work in from the waist down. And then we've had the vaccinations, which minor miracle. So we've all had those of us who choose to have had the vaccinations. I've just had my autumn booster. So I'm carrying on. I've got a bit of a sore throat. So if it crackles, I apologize, but hopefully we'll get through this. Right, what I thought I would start with, because I did a conference this week, and I'm in London next week doing another conference at the Law Society offices at Hall. A lot of people are still getting permitted development wrong. So I thought I would just do a couple of slides on permitted development, because the problem being our fabulous central government have called things that aren't truly permitted. And everybody talks about permitted development rights and thinks you can just skip off and do these things without any recourse to the planning department. And that's not necessarily the case. But I thought I would just, at the expense of possibly insulting some people who go, do you know what, I know all that. Why are you telling me this? I'm down with this. Well, I'm just going to repeat it because some of it bears repeating. And I don't want to insult people's intelligence, but I've done a little traffic light model there with emojis and, green, amber, red. Right, permitted development. This is the true permitted development, which means you do not need to go anywhere near a planning department. You might need building regs, but you don't need full planning permission. So no application required, fully permitted. And it includes, and we all know this, if you want to put a conservatory on the back of your house, you're probably going to be able to do it under permitted development rights, but you need to be careful and check all of the criteria. And it also includes some changes of use. And again, I want to talk about those changes of use because some people are forgetting some things, and other people are sort of just getting some things a little bit wrong, as was evidenced by someone who came to me recently, and he'd put a dormer on out at the back slope of the roof. And he'd come to me and he wanted to do other bits and pieces. And he said, oh, well, of course, I've done that because it's permitted development. Well, I looked at it, and unfortunately, it was one of these properties that has a road at the front, the main road at the front, but it also had a named back alleyway that was navigable by a vehicle. So it was a named road. And the legislation says that if you are bringing a dormer out of the slope of the roof, it doesn't say rear, doesn't say front. It says fronting onto or adjacent to a road, then you need planning permission. It's not permitted. So this guy had gone ahead and built this, you know, fabulous big dormer. And I said, well, it needs planning permission. And he said, no, it doesn't. So I sent him an extract from the legislation. It does, and I'm really sorry. And the planner did agree and said, yeah, you need planning permission for this. Unfortunately, it was in a conservation area and it wasn't approved. So you've got to be careful with this. You can't be cavalier and think, oh, do you know what? I know what permitted development rights are. Now, a lot of people go ahead and build conservatories, extensions, what have you, and you don't need permission for that. But when you come to either sell, or if you're a property investor or developer, and you come to refinance, a lender or a purchaser's solicitor might say, we want evidence from the council that this was permitted development. They will not trust that you just say, oh, it was permitted development. So you may then end up in a situation where you have to then go to the planning department to get them to issue a certificate of lawfulness to say that what you have built did comply with permitted development rights. Now, that is not a position that you want to be in. So the next permitted development, and I hate doing this, but it's permitted development, it's badged as permitted development. It's actually a neighbour notification, and it does what it says on the tin. It's for the larger household extensions. Not a lot of people have realised are using this right, and it's a shame, really. Larger household extensions, single story. If you have a detached house, you can go out 8 metres single story. If it's a terrace or a semi-detached, it's 6 metres single story. And you can add this large extension, which will give you a large sparkly kitchen, a big family room with a big TV on the wall and the white leather sofas and all of this stuff that everybody has with these big kitchens that everybody just sits down and watches Bake Off. They don't actually do any cooking. They just watch the cooking programs. So an application is required. Even though it's badged as permitted development, you have to submit a prior approval to the council for their prior approval. Now, the council has 48 days, 42 days, not 48. I'm looking at the 8 above, 42 days in which to approve these applications. If they do not notify you within that 42 days, you can claim consent by default. And I've done this with a couple of councils. However, if a neighbour objects, then it's like snakes and ladders. You have to go back down the snake and you have to get full planning permission. But if you have neighbours who go, oh, you know what, it's a single story extension, I don't care. Then if within 42 days the council come back to you, then you've got their prior approval. If they don't within 42 days, you can claim it as a deemed consent by default. So that is these strange little hybrid things that you need to be aware of if you are a property investor or developer. It might just, can you imagine what that would do, especially in the London boroughs? Can you imagine what that might do to the rental income return if you built a 6 or 8 metre extension? I think that would probably improve matters. And I've even done this to facilitate subsequently turning a property into an HMO. So again, it's a bit of a no-brainer, really. So Permitted development, this is the full prior approval procedure. Now, prior approval procedure used to be really easy. When it first came in 2013, then 2016, it was reiterated. It was a really easy system. There were very few controls. And for example, you will know, probably near to you, there's an office that's been converted to residential, even massive tower blocks of offices that have been converted to residential. An application for prior approval has to be submitted to the council. And when it says prior approval, the work must not have started. It has to be prior to the commencement of the work. And if you have started it, then you can't do this. So the council with these ones has 56 days to decide. That's for the old proposals. With some of the new proposals that have come in, the councils have the right to ask for an extension of time. The fees for these used to be, you could take a block of offices, you could convert it to 100 residential self-contained flats, and your fee would have been about 96 quid. Not anymore. The fees have increased massively, and they're, depending on which procedure you use, they're about £100 per flat. So it's no longer as financially lucrative as it once was. So that's the rundown of these permitted development rights. Now, you see, when I said in the true permitted development, I said some changes of use. And this seems to be the mantra of every property investor and developer. And they've been on a course. And the course, people who run the course will say, oh, don't do your single lets, you know, convert your house into battery chicken living. Some of them, I know some HMOs are beautiful, but some aren't. So, and trust me, whoever is watching this, you are never gonna get tenants as good looking as this. It ain't gonna happen. Might happen in New York City, but no, it's a fantasy. So, you know, I mean, and basically the whole Friends situation is an HMO. They're all living together. So permitted development right is a nationally conferred right by central government. You can change a single dwelling house to a small HMO. That is 3 to 6 unrelated people sharing facilities. A lot of the time now, the only facility they share is probably a kitchen and maybe laundry facilities. Most of these conversions, that people go and put an ensuite bathroom in a living room and convert it to a bedroom, and you're off. You cannot do this. As I said, this is the nuts of planning. On the one hand, you get central government conferring national permitted development rights. On the other hand, you can have councils who can use their powers under Article 4 direction to remove those permitted development rights. So where a council has removed the permitted development rights, a full planning application must be submitted. Also, it's about the number of residents, not the number of rooms. So if you get a large Victorian villa type of thing, and you've got big rooms, big double beds in, you know, 2 or 3 of the rooms, and you get people who start to cohabit, they go out clubbing one night, they meet someone, come back and share my room, fab. But if you then go from 6 people to 7, 8 or 9, anything above 6 requires full planning permission. Doesn't matter about an Article 4 direction, whether there's an Article 4 direction in place or not. It's about, so it's not a 6-bed HMO, it's a 6-person HMO. You cannot do this in Wales. So if you find you've got a property just over the border, and it's in the Welsh Assembly government territory, there are no permitted development rights in Wales. You need full planning permission across Wales. So, Article 4 directions. Where the council has brought into force an Article 4 direction, and Reading is, well, Reading's about to bring in an Article 4 direction for an entirely different reason. And this is because councils can also bring in Article 4 directions to prevent the permitted development right for the change of use from offices to residential. It's not just about, excuse me, that's my phone. It's not just about HMOs. It's about everything. Article 4 directives can relate to everything, and they remove the permitted development rights. They usually have good reason to do this. It's because they've got an oversaturation, they're trying to protect the area, and they're wanting to restrict any HMO numbers or anything else that they've put in place. So an application has to be submitted. Once you submit the application, you've got other restrictive planning policies that kick in. So the likelihood is, in a lot of these cases, if you have to submit a planning application, you're not going to get planning permission because you may not be able to comply with the planning policies. There used to be no council fee, but in 2018, the regs were changed that said it's at the discretion of the council. So most councils charge a fee. And don't forget, if you're looking for Article 4 directions, please put in Article 4 HMO, because there'll be lots for conservation areas and things like that. There can be more than one. In one council, there can be more than one Article 4. I think Oxford's got 3 or 4. So just be careful to make sure you find the map covering the area and make sure that your property is outside of that area. As I've said before, an HMO for 7 tenants automatically needs planning permission, and do not confuse planning with licensing. Planning and licensing are determined under entirely separate pieces of legislation. Even though, and people can't get their heads around this, and I can understand, even though in the same council, you might be granted an HMO license, that does not necessarily mean that you will get planning permission with that same council. Excuse me. And if you get licensing, for example, for up to 10 people, again, that doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to get planning permission for up to 10 people. So now I want to talk about this. It's not really, there's just 2 slides that I've put in blue here. It's not really the major bulk of the planning reforms, but it's the planning reforms came in, and you need to understand about this because it's a massive change. There was a change to the use classes order that hadn't been changed since 1987, and that came in on the 1st of September 2020. I can't believe it's 2 years ago. I've been talking about this for the last 2 years. I cannot believe it's that long ago. It seems really fresh and new and different. So massive change. Lots of these uses that you can see there. A new use class E was created for commercial, and it's called commercial, business and service. And it combines all of these uses into one single class. Class A1, Class A2, A3, B1, A, B and C. That's office, business, research and development, and very, very low key industrial. Part of Class D1, that's clinics and medical facilities, and part of Class D2, gyms and indoor sports and that. Class F1 also came into being, learning and non-residential institutions, and Class F2, local community. I'm not going to talk about those. They're not the bulk of it. The issue with this is, why is this so important? Why is Class E so important? You need to know about this for the following slides and things that I'm going to talk about. So Class E has lumped together, and that's the best word to describe it, lumped together, shops, financial, cafes, offices, all in one use. Well, what does that mean? That means that in view of the central government, all of these uses are the same, and to move from one to the other doesn't constitute development. It's not permitted development. It just isn't development. So you can change and swap. So if you own a shop and the person who was the tenant in the shop is saying, oh, we're not making any money, you know, the coronavirus has killed us off. And someone comes along and says, oh, well, I'd like to use it for a cafe, because there's lots more cafes and coffee shops have sprung up, I've noticed. People seem to be sitting around drinking coffee. Now that you can get out of your house, they do seem to be doing that. So someone comes along and says, I'd like to stay the tenancy and I'd like to use it for a cafe. Yeah, go ahead. No planning permit. Do I need to go to planning? No, you don't. Right. Then after 6 months, that cafe owner said, oh, do you know what? I'm not doing this. Then someone comes along and says, I'd like to use it for a yoga studio. Okay. Do I need planning? No, you don't. It's all within the same. Do you see what I'm saying? It's all within the same use class. There is no size restriction on this. It's all commercial and commercial business and service. It can flow. Now, this is in order to help high streets, arguably, but it's not just for the high street, but to help the vitality and viability, so that you don't need to go through the planning process to move, so that you don't end up with vacant units on streets. So there's also the sui generis class, which is Latin and it means of its own kind, and it's the so-called bad neighbor uses. Now, they've thrown into this class A4 and class A5, the former class A4 and class A5, pubs and hot food takeaways. This means that in sui generis, if you want to change the use of a property, you have to get planning permission. There is no permitted development rights. Now, there's one exception to that with the hot food takeaways, and I'll talk about that in a bit. So that's sui generis. So if you're looking at buying a pub, be careful. It's in the so-called bad neighbor development now. This is Lichfields, and I always talk about this and I always post about it. And Lichfields think I'm wonderful because I tell them, everybody, that this is the best reference guide. If you put into your browser Lichfield's guide to the use classes order, it has to be from 2021 onwards. Make sure that you don't get an old one. And if you put in 2022, it'll probably come up with the latest one. So this gives you all of the use classes, but it also gives you all of the classes in Class E, Class F1 and Class F2. Class C3 has not been changed. That is still dwelling house and it's still in there. So pubs. Excuse me. I told you I wasn't well. Right. No permitted development rights now. You used to be able to. This is why you see a lot of former pubs have been converted to Tesco Express, Sainsbury's Metro, all of it, and Spar and all of these kinds of shops, because they didn't need planning permission for it. But that has now gone by the by. There are no permitted development rights for pubs. You can't change them. And it's no use saying, oh, well, it's got landlord's accommodation upstairs and that's residential. No, it's not, because the planning unit is all one and it is pub and it's in sui generis now. So if your strategy, because you've done a course, if your strategy is to buy pubs and convert them to residential, you need planning permission, full planning permission, no mucking about. You also need planning permission. I get lots of people who say, oh, well, I'm just splitting a house up. No, you're not. You're creating self-contained units, which requires planning permission. There is no permitted development right to convert a house into flats. Nowhere. And you've got to be careful, because in London, there are minimum size standards. Unless your property is over a certain size, and it depends on which borough you're in, then you cannot even contemplate conversion. Once you've done that, these are all of the things that can be, that this type of change of use can be refused on. There are sometimes very restrictive planning policies. You might have to, because you're creating new dwelling units, you might have planning contributions to pay. Your room sizes need to comply with the policy. There'll be parking wars because all of the neighbours will be up in arms because they won't have anywhere to park. You need to provide amenity space, cycle bin storage, acoustic insulation, energy sustainability, and there will be neighbour objections, no doubt about it. So those are some of the reasons that I've seen these things be refused for. Now, this is my impression. This is what I see in my brain. Now, people look at it and go, what's that? Well, it's a wolf. It's a wolf in sheep's clothing. Can you see? Oh, God. So I was presenting this and they went, what's that? It's a double-headed. No, it's a wolf under. Oh, never mind.
I understand it. I got it.
Excellent. I'm so pleased. Permitted development rights, which are not permitted. You need the prior approval of the council. In my view, these have been wrongly badged and lots of people are getting into lots of trouble with these things. So I think if this gives you a visual, permitted development rights, prior approval, changes of use are wolves in sheep's clothing, even more so now. Right. Let me talk to you about one of the first ones that came in 2 years ago. Can't believe this is 2 years. Right. Upward extensions, or what they call air rights in the States. This was a brand new part of the General Permitted Development Order, which now runs to 180 odd pages, I think. So the General Permitted Development Order has been amended and amended and amended and amended. Right, so this is for the construction of new dwelling houses. Now, for construction of new dwelling houses, read flats. It is Class A. It is to create new self-contained flats on top of detached blocks of flats. It's only for, this class is only for detached blocks of flats. And you can put up to 2 additional stories on the top of blocks, purpose-built blocks of flats. Now, the top left I put on there because I thought this is what the now King Charles would probably call a carbuncle. That is the Shankly Hotel in Liverpool. And that is, I don't think this was done under prior approval, but it's a fun photograph and it's bloody ugly. I'm sorry I'm swearing, but there we go. Now, the other 3 that I've got on there are far more, what I would call far more reasonable and far more doable. And you can see that 1 story has been created on the one on the top right, 2 stories and in a sort of a glass and steel construction have been created bottom left, and then bottom right. I quite like this sort of very brutalist sort of architecture that's been put on quite a nice, possibly Georgian building.
That looks horrible.
I like that. I like the design of that. I think it's really well done. I think it probably took some doing to get it through past planners, but I like the way it's been handled. So, but each one to his own, you see. I mean, probably the classic one is the top right because it's back and it's low down and it creates I don't know, it creates a very shishi flat or 2 on the top of that building. But upward extension, so you can do this under the prior approval system. Provided it complies with all of the criteria, this does not need full planning permission. It can be done under prior approval. Now, this is death by PowerPoint. I'm sorry. The next one that came in was 1 and 2 story extensions, either to enlarge a dwelling house by adding additional stories. So if you have a detached house, doesn't need to be detached, but a detached house, say, on an estate of detached houses that's been built by Taylor Wimpey or something like that, you can apply to add additional stories. However, there are a shed load of limitations on this, and it will be the council can take into account design and external appearance. So don't think that these are a rubber stamp job, because they can be refused on the grounds of design and external appearance, overshadowing, overlooking. These things are going to stick out like a sore thumb in my view, but you know, this is what the legislation says. Also, in the new part 20, you've got classes AA, AB, AC, and AD. And this is for commercial or mixed use or dwelling house buildings, either detached or terraced. And you can add extensions onto there to create new flats. The top one that I've highlighted in yellow is purely to enlarge a single dwelling house. You're not creating additional flats. The part 20 is to create new flats on commercial, mixed use dwelling houses, either detached or terraced. You can put up to 2 stories. If it's a bungalow, you can only add 1 story. This is subject to a load of matters that the local planning authority can take into account. So it's not, these things are not now for the faint-hearted. Now, we've also got, came in August 2 years ago, Class ZA. And this is for where we had previously Class O, which was conversion of existing office buildings, which were found to not really be fit for purpose. We've now got, you can demolish and rebuild those buildings. It is only for single purpose detached blocks of flats or any other detached building that was in B1 office use. And it had to have existed on 12th of March 2020. And there's all sorts of other criteria and requirements. So you can demolish and rebuild these buildings to replace it with either a purpose-built detached block of flats or a purpose-built single dwelling house. Now, you might think that might be a big house, but it depends on the size of the block of flats. Could be a small block of flats, small block of 4 flats. You want to demolish it, rebuild it with a single dwelling house. And you can add stories on top of this as well, but you can only build on the existing footprint. So you can't put extensions on. You would have to do that afterwards under a full planning application. So that's the demolition and rebuild. Now, I've called this OMG, and I'm hoping that what I'm going to talk about in a minute will become clear. So Class O, which was the GPDO use class that you used, not use class, the GPDO class that you used to convert office buildings to residential. Now, this disappeared last year. You can no longer use Class O. It has been replaced, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So now these things lasted for 3 years. So if you come across, if you're looking at office buildings and converting them, if you come across any of these, please be very, very careful. Because, for example, if you find one of the, because they last for 3 years. So if it was finally approved last July, it's now got 2 years left on it, but you have to complete this. So if you're in the market for an office building to convert it and someone comes to you with one of these things, and for example, just to make the maths easy, it had permission to convert to 50 flats. You probably are not going to get those 50 flats in there now because of the additional requirements that have been brought in. And I'll go through those in a minute. So be very, very, you're probably going to go from 50 to maybe 40. So that is going to have a significant impact on the return on investment. Return on your investment. So you're going to have to be very careful. If you submit another prior approval to do the same thing, the likelihood is you're not going to get the same approval. You're not going to get the same numbers, mainly because size standards have come in. So that's Class O. Now Class M, look, M's, bond, I'm trying to help here. Now, do you remember I said there was a an exception with regard to hot food takeaways? This is it. They've kept class M, but they've changed the wording of it. So it's certain uses: laundrette, betting office, payday loan shop, hot food takeaway can be converted to class C3 dwelling houses or flats. Well, you can convert it to a house if you want, but flats. So it's change of use. The maximum floor space is 150 square meters. Can't put any extensions. You can demolish a bit if you like, not a listed building or in a conservation area. So you can do this. And the matters that the council can consider are transport and highways, contamination, flood risk, loss of services, design and external appearance, and provision of adequate light to all habitable rooms. Now, you also have to comply with the minimum space standards as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. So that's class M of my OMG. We've now got a class MA, which is the class that replaces your class O, which was formerly your office to residential conversions. This now do you see why I talked about use classes order class E? Because you've got all of those other things. You've got shops and everything else that can now be converted to residential. Now, loads of people came to me and said, oh, I'm going to convert Debenhams. And you think, well, no, probably not. They put a limit on this. It's 1,500 square meters. You can't do this in a listed building, but you can do this in a conservation area. It must have it must have fallen within class E for 2 years continuously previously. And it has to have been vacant for 3 months before you submit the application. So there are quite a few boxes that need to be ticked there. And again, the council can consider all sorts of things. I'm not going to read all of those because my throat's going, but you can see the things that you have to comply with. And because of Grenfell, where the development, if it's a certain number of stories, and I think it's 8, there has to meet fire risk, and this is included within your planning requirements. So a lot of these applications have to be accompanied by lots of reports. Class G of my OMG, a GG apparently is the first one out the gate. The trap, the cage, whatever they call them. Right, conversion of class E again, or a betting office or a payday loan. Now, this used to be fully permitted development. You could put flats above a shop up to 2 without requiring planning permission. It was absolutely full permitted development right. Now, because of the other restrictions that have been put on, they've had to make this prior approval. You can't use the ground floor of the shop as any part of the flat, like a kitchen or a bathroom, and it's to be used as a single dwelling house. The matters to be considered by the council are the usual, but also storage and management of domestic waste, because lots of people were having bins all over the pavement and that sort of thing. So, as from the 1st of August 2020, again 2 years ago, adequate levels of natural daylight have to be proved in any submission. You can't just, you now have to comply, you have to provide layout drawings, and you have to provide elevational drawings to prove that each habitable room, and the only room that isn't habitable is a bathroom, has adequate levels of natural daylight, and councils are requiring all sorts of information on this. Sizes, windows to be measured, depth of flats to be measured. I've got consultants who are now doing natural daylight reports. So councils are asking for a lot of information on this. Excuse me, just needed a little drinky. And yes, size does matter. So, as of the 6th of April last year, the council said all prior approval applications, this does not apply to full planning applications. Full planning applications will have to comply with the council's normal size standards, whatever, and it can be a lot more than 39 square meters. They might not have standards. They might be fine with studio units at 30 square meters. But this is just for prior approval applications. So 39 square meters, the new minimum space standard for a single person living in a 1-bed flat. Now, who the hell's going to go around and check if there's one person or two people in there? I don't know. 39 square meters if there's a bathroom. If there is only a shower room, then it's 37 square meters. But there should be all sorts of storage and stuff in here. I'm not sure who's going to check any of this stuff. But the drawings that you submit for prior approval must show that each unit to be provided, to be created, is a minimum 39 if there's a bathroom, 37 if there's a shower room. And this is why I said previously you need to be very careful with previous consents, because they may not now comply with these new space standards and the natural levels of daylight as well. The size standards come from the nationally described space standards, which first came in the London plan and now has been adopted by lots of other councils generally, but it is an absolute requirement. There's no getting away from this. If your flats that you're creating do not comply with this, it will automatically be refused. And not forgetting, I don't know how many of you are interested in converting agricultural buildings, but there are agricultural buildings that can be converted under the prior approval system, must be part of an agricultural unit. It's now up to a total of 5, not in special protection areas, and it is subject to design and external appearance. And these 2 that I've got on here were 2 particularly good examples of making a barn still look like a barn in the countryside or in a farmhouse courtyard sort of area. Right, these are the I thought I'd just put this on here. These are some of the expert reports that you're going to require, but certainly for prior approval applications, where appropriate, obviously, but also for full planning applications. So for your prior approvals, this is just from my experience, transport and highways to cover parking and the like. Contaminated land, if there is any contaminated land, usually if it's an existing building that's been there for a number of years, there's not a contaminated land issue. Flood risk, this is certainly an issue, and you would need to get a full flood risk assessment and mitigation report for some applications, for some councils. Noise mitigation measures between floors and between flats. That's something that we see a lot of. And adequate levels of natural daylight assessment. If your property, even if it's prior approval, if the property that you're converting is within, and I had this recently in Leicester, is in a conservation area, the council are likely to come back and ask for a heritage statement. And again, it's just additional cost and time and everything else, but you're better to be forewarned about this so that you're not having to scrabble and do it later. Of course, if you've got full planning applications, you could also require a whole raft of other reports, such as arboricultural tree assessment reports, biodiversity, which is a big one now. Lots of people are coming wanting biodiversity reports for things like bats, newts, badgers, the whole variety, habitat, wildlife, birds, all sorts of things. So just be aware that planning applications and prior approval applications are a lot more complicated than they used to be. Right, so we've done prior approval. I thought I'd just throw a few slides in here to go through a few other things. An enforcement notice. An enforcement notice is where either development has taken place without planning permission, or it's taken place because you've not complied, or someone's not complied with the conditions of a planning permission. So an enforcement notice will be served. It's a legal document. It needs to be complied with, and you need to take action fairly swiftly. Or it's served on an owner, and if there's a lender involved, it will be served on the lender as well. And it will appear in searches, and it may also appear when it's been resolved, which is a bit naughty because they should annotate it or take it off. So if you get an enforcement notice, or anybody you know gets an enforcement notice, you only have 28 days in which to appeal. So you need to act fairly swiftly with these things. If you get a refusal, this is normally the face that people pull when they bring a refusal notice to me. Please read what the decision notice says. What are the reasons for refusal? And can they be addressed by submitting a new application? Someone came to me recently with a reason for refusal that said failure to submit sufficient information. Well, you're not going to go to appeal with that. If you fail to submit the information, submit a new application and submit and add the information. Sure, and you can even do it for free. So surely that is a bit of a no-brainer. Going, people say, "Ooh, want to go to appeal," and you think, no, an appeal again is not for the faint-hearted, and you can't add additional information at the stage of the appeal. The planning inspector will only take into account the original planning application documents, and he will also be bound by the same council policy that was used to refuse the application in the first instance. Now, I know there are a lot of councils, and especially when it goes to committee, who do make ridiculous decisions and they do need to be appealed. But please be sensible and read what the reasons for refusal are. And if you can address them in a new application, it's probably going to be quicker than doing an appeal. So appeals, just let's talk about appeals. 3 different types of appeals that go to the independent planning inspectorate, who have a central location in Bristol, but most of the inspectors work from home, and they tend to be local to the areas in which they hear appeals. So there's the written representation one. This is something like 80% of all appeals are done by written reps. You do a report, council does a report, goes into the inspector comes out and has a look and then issues a decision. There's also an informal hearing, which is a bit like sitting around a dinner table, and the inspector will sit at the head of the table and will ask questions of either side, and it's a bit of a debate. Public inquiry is where you end up with barristers, and it's formal cross-examination, and it usually takes a minimum of 1, possibly 2 or 3 days. Tends to be for more strategic developments, and it tends to be for large housing developments, that kind of thing. If you want to appeal against the non-determination of an application, I've got several applications in that have been in for 3 months and nothing has been done with them. So after 8 weeks, you can appeal a non-determination. I'm convinced it's a bit of a waste of time, but it can be done. The opportunity is there. If it's a householder application, you've got 12 weeks from the date of the decision to appeal. Any other appeals, it's 6 months, but don't forget an enforcement notice, you've only got 28 days from the date of service. And remember, 35% of appeals are allowed. So that means you've got a 1 in 3 chance of getting your appeal allowed with the planning inspectorate. So what happens when you get planning approved? It doesn't end there, to be honest. You get a decision notice with a prior approval. It's not a decision notice, it's just a decision letter. So it's a slightly different thing. Please read it, and please read what it says, how long you've got, make a note of it in your diary if you're not, selling the property on. Condition number 1 will tell you when it expires. Says usually 3 years, but it doesn't have to be 3 years. The councils can change this, so please read these things. Are there any conditions? Invariably in this day and age, there will be conditions. You need to discharge conditions with a new application. It's an application to discharge conditions, and it has to be submitted, and it's likely to take several months again to be discharged, because you're going to have to submit things like landscaping details, drainage details, flood risk or flood mitigation, all sorts of things can have to be. And some conditions are called precedent conditions, which means they have to be discharged before you start any work. So getting planning approval is fabulous. but it's kind of only the beginning of the process. And don't forget, there's something called, I don't normally say this because it frightens people, but there is something called a judicial review. If there have been neighbours who have objected, and if they are fairly vociferous neighbours, and if they've got a bit of money behind them and they're retired and all of this kind of thing, they can apply to have a judicial review of the council's decision to approve. This should normally be done, there's normally a period of about 3 months, but the High Court judges prefer that it be submitted within about 6 weeks. So if there have been lots of objections, just be aware there is a judicial review process. Now then, this time last year, we had an old change and we got Michael Gove in as the levelling up secretary. I don't know what that department's called anymore. Now, I don't know about you, but I think that Michael Gove looks like Joe 90, but it's just me. And there was a squealing of brakes because the planning bill that had come out had been royally roasted as being an absolute catastrophe waiting to happen. So that the brakes were put on with that. And I don't know about you, but having someone who's supposed to be responsible for housing and development, and he's seen holding a banner that says stop overdevelopment, I wasn't terribly impressed, and I didn't hold out much hope. But now we've got the catalogue of disasters continues. It's not a political comment. There will be further reforms. There's no two ways about it. The planning bill that is already going through is probably going to be changed. There's threatened to be a national planning policy framework. Boris Johnson obviously has gone, and we've now got Liz Truss. I think they've got more on their plate. Kwasi Kwarteng did the mini budget. They've got more on their plate than just planning reforms, but planning reforms are still in the mix. I don't even know if these two on the right are still in post, because there seems to be a revolving door at number 10. So what is the future of planning? Well, your guess is as good as mine. There is allegedly, I put on social media, there's allegedly going to be another announcement on the 19th of October, which I think is next Wednesday, to follow up on the announcement in the mini budget of investment zones. Now, quite frankly, we've seen this before. We've had enterprise zones, we've had free ports, we've had local development orders, we've had all sorts of things. They take ages to come in, and invariably they don't do what they're intended to do. So apparently central government are talking to 38 authorities with about 24 sites. Now, we've already had, I think it was Oxford, have said, we're not applying for any investment zones. It does not sit well with what we are trying to achieve in the council area. So that's interesting that there's obviously a rebellion has started, because these investment zones are modeled on what were the free ports. They're talking about a deregulation and a relaxation of planning policies. Again, we don't know exactly what, because it's not written down. This may come out next week. They're talking about a removal of height limits. Well, okay, fine. What does that mean? Ditching of affordable housing provision. Well, again, if you're not going to supply or build affordable housing, what's going to happen to that? Where are people going to live? And a ditching of also of the environmental requirements. And this has had the environmental bodies, especially RSPB, absolutely up in arms and saying, you know, this is a complete sellout. They're also talking about planning obligations, i.e. Section 106 agreements, could also be massively scaled back. I mean, and that was, Section 106 is one of the things that requires housing provision, and they're talking about putting the threshold of housing provision to 40 or 50. Now, they've talked about this before, and it was blocked by a lot of people. So the future for planning is kind of up in the air at the moment. So 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 6, that's me. Planet Right, planning services, we do drawings as well. I do a 30-minute telephone consultation if you email admin@Planet Right. I will do Zoom, Google Meets, Teams. My planning my website, that's my printer just churning. My website is still down. It's still under construction because I can't decide what to do with it. There is a fee for a 30-minute telephone consultation. It's there. If you want to connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter, please do so. Not on Facebook, because I tend to post silly things on Facebook that amuse me, but are not terribly businesslike. So that's me. Thank you very much for listening and for inviting me to talk. I'm sorry.
Linda, we'll pay you in 50p's and send the bill to Surinder for this extended consultation. So, as Surinder is busy doing something else, which he can't be named, a couple of questions, if you don't mind. I'll keep short ones. You mentioned appeals by written, and then you've got the big one where it's you get public inquiry. What's the thing about barristers' hearings? Is that becoming popular, or what's going on there?
No, I mean, barristers will be required if you're doing a public inquiry. I mean, there are some people who companies who represent themselves, but invariably they'll engage the services of a barrister. It generally, it's a very, very small percentage public inquiries, and it tends the planning inspectorate can veto if an applicant or an appellant asks for a public inquiry. If the planning inspectorate think it's not required, they will say no. They'll downgrade it. They might downgrade it. They probably won't downgrade it all the way to a written reps. They'll probably downgrade it to informal hearing. You would not expect a barrister to appear at an informal hearing. You might get a solicitor and a planning consultant or a planning lawyer, but you wouldn't expect a barrister to be doing, because it's not cross-examination, it's debate more than cross-examination. The public inquiry is a full-blown debate. It tends to be larger developments, nationally significant or strategically and regionally significant developments, and it will include large housing developments as well.
Okay, wow, that's interesting. So it's up to the planning inspectorate to tell you if you can bring your barristers, the really big guns, or the guys who know nothing, usually the solicitors. And please don't take your local solicitors, because they don't know nothing about nothing anyway. Sorry, solicitors, a bit of a go there. But yeah, so it's up to the planning inspectorate. Planning conditions. It was interesting you mentioned planning conditions.
Mm.
Usually people think the standard planning condition must have started within 3 years. Now, am I right in thinking that's increasingly being replaced by must have been completed within 3 years? Or have I got
not that particular condition. The prior approval applications, the theory is that you are supposed to complete these. The whole idea between the prior approval system procedure is that it's a hybrid. It was meant to be quicker and easier than a full planning application. It's turning out not to be. And what they were trying to do was say, look, let's quickly get this through the system, get people out there, get these things converted, built, done, dusted, and let's provide more housing for people. That was the theory. And so they said it should be completed within the 3 years. Now, this full planning, it's slightly different. If you can prove, now this is where we get into very woolly territory. If you can prove that you have made a meaningful start within 3 years, it holds the development in perpetuity. But the commencement of development has to be substantial and robust. You can't just dig a hole on the site and say, there you go, we started. there has to be some form. And again, it's open to interpretation, and every single council will have a different interpretation of it.
Oh dear.
Yes, oh dear.
Right, and that leads me nicely on to the next question, probably my final one, because you'll probably shoot me after I ask you this one. I'm going to go easy on you. I'm just going to keep it 3 questions. Worst councils, name and shame, please.
There aren't any. They're all bad.
Love it. Sorry, that's
actually. I'm hedging more towards the councils who are being really good at the minute.
Yeah, that's another way of doing it. Okay, who are doing really good?
And the councils who are really pulling out all the stops and trying to work with you. And I've had I did something for change of use of offices to 14 flats recently with Sefton Council in Crosby, and they asked for a few more bits and pieces of information, but on the whole they were fabulous.
Where is Sefton in Crosby?
Liverpool.
Oh, no wonder that. Okay, but that's quite good because
Liverpool are dreadful.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, because there's a lot happening in Liverpool, yeah.
Oh, well, it's a big city. I mean, you know, and now they're going to be holding the Eurovision. I heard on the radio the other day that they were panicking about properties being rented out for Eurovision, and you know.
Oh, don't worry, nobody goes there anyway. Who the hell listens to that stuff?
No, hush your mouth. No, there's a lot of people out there who love Eurovision.
Yeah, most of the Eastern Europeans, right? Because we never win anything.
Well, we're holding it for Ukraine, aren't we?
Well, yeah, because we're hardly going to let Russia do that.
No, don't go there. Don't go there.
All right, brilliant. No, thank you very much.
Very welcome. Everybody else has disappeared. It's just me and you. Manny's there.
Well, no, they're hopefully watching on Facebook. But brilliant. No, thank you very much.
You're very welcome once again.
No, super. When's the next date to watch out? Watch out for?
19th. So I understand, but we don't know. But yeah, watch out for the 19th because I may be coming back.
Well, you're most welcome. And one more question before you go. Bonus question for me, I guess. When are you starting your political podcast? Because I love to hear that.
Political?
Yeah, if you go back a couple of slides, you suddenly hate the government, don't you?
No, I don't. I just think that it's a catalogue of disasters at the minute, and I don't think I'm alone in that.
I think everybody's thinking that now, right?
Well, yeah, I just don't. No, I don't go on about my political views because I don't really have any, to be honest. Yeah. But yeah, I mean the government at the moment, it's scary.
Yeah. I mean, it's beyond incompetence, right?
Well, it's incredible. I don't understand how these people in such high levels of power can make such a diabolical mess of things and seem to be denying that there's a problem. And that's, I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
that's a worry.
Well, when you start the political program, I love to be on it. You know, and I hate the government. I think I hate the government as much as you do, or the politicians. You know, I just like.
I don't have a hating bone in my body, but
no, I don't hate them, but I think they're useless.
Worrying.
Yeah, well, that's another. Look, thank you very much. I've taken up a lot of your time. That was very, very useful.
Thank you.
We'll see you in a couple of weeks, depending on what happens in the 19th.
Yeah, we'll see.
Right. Depends on what happens on the 19th, right? But brilliant. Look, thank you ever so much. Hope your cough gets better. I hope it's nothing serious. And I guess watch this space sounds quite good, right?
I think you have to. There's some weird and wonderful things are going to come out of central government. But there are a lot of...
It might even be Liz Truss who's coming out of central government.
Well, possibly. But there are obviously, as is evidenced by Oxfordshire, they're just saying, no, we're not having enterprise zones. So if a massive number of councils do that, then any enterprise zones the central government come up with is just going to be a waste of time.
I'm guessing they're saying we don't need the money, go away.
No. They're saying it's against their environmental ethos. And it's not what they want to see in their area. They don't want to have enterprise zones where there is no limit to the height. Environmental issues are swept aside and there's no affordable housing, which you can't disagree with, to be honest.
Well, affordable housing means different things. If you're talking about affordable housing in central London, it could mean £500,000 or £600,000, I believe.
Yeah, affordable is a specific. It's not that people can afford it.
Yeah, it's a relative term, right?
Yeah, it's affordable in terms that it's handed over to housing association or to the council, so that they can place the people on their council house waiting list in there.
Yeah, so it's, it's a relative term. But no, brilliant. That's enough of me.
All right.
Thank you ever so much.
Nice to speak to you again.